Tales of the TARDIS was a last-minute surprise for Doctor Who fans in the 60th anniversary year. A series of 6 episodes, all featuring the turn of many classic series doctors and companions as they reflect on their previous adventures. What could have easily have been a glorified clip show ended up being 6 highly emotional, character-driven episodes, which brought new depth and sometimes much-needed closure to multiple characters throughout Doctor Who. Today, we're going to break down each episode, things I liked and disliked, and talk about the potential future for a second series, and discuss why I think that this was the perfect spin-off for the 60th anniversary. Tales of the TARDIS was a 6-episode miniseries that kicked off the 60th celebrations on the 1st of November 2023. Each episode featured 2 brandly new film scenes, with a repeat of an existing classic serial in the middle, like a tasty little Doctor Who sandwich. Episode 1, Earthshock. The 5th Doctor and Tegan Jovanka both awake to find themselves in an unfamiliar TARDIS. After they've reunited, the Doctor speculates they are in a remembered TARDIS. It's a memory of the TARDIS that feeds on stories. They decide to tell the strongest story of all, the day Adric died, something they avoided talking about for a very long time. This first episode was written by Russell T Davies and immediately sets the tone for the series. It's fantastical, but has a heavy focus on emotion. What have these characters been up to since we saw them last? What did they never discuss that they should have? The performances from Peter Davison and Janet Fielding are pitch perfect, like no time has passed at all. It's quite common for an actor to return to a part years down the line and they're playing it completely differently, and it can be super jarring. But these two play it exactly the same, yet more refined. I think Big Finish might get a little credit here, since the actors have been playing these parts on audio for years, that jumping back into character is a bit simpler maybe. Also, with Janet's TV reappearance in The Power of the Doctor, she's raring to go. It makes sense that their episode centers around the loss of Adric, something that was missing from the original classic run. He died, they felt sad, and then they said, well, we have to move on.
Next car, honey, next car!
Doctor Who's emotional storytelling has changed a lot since the 1980s, and nowadays, audiences expect these moments to stay with the characters. It feels like a deliberate choice by Russell to marry the classic with the new series, to say, this is the same show. Even having the two hug at the beginning of the episode saying, we never really did this, did we? We do now. It feels like they're really trying to blend the two. In Big Finish, there are multiple stories where they deal with the aftermath of Adric's death, so for Big Finish listeners, this mini episode might not be as impactful. All 6 episodes averages out to about 50 minutes. And all of those scenes are set within the memory TARDIS set. I feel like it must have been really difficult for the director to come up with creative and exciting new shots for that runtime, when just limited to one set. But moments such as transitioning Adric's destroyed badge at the end of Earthshock, with the Doctor holding the restored star badge in the memory TARDIS, is just really smart. Also, I think by having the badge in the TARDIS all restored and not broken anymore is a nice way of saying in the memory TARDIS, everything is still alive and anything can come back. I think Janet and Peter do their absolute best to pretend to care about Adric being killed off, since they clearly didn't care for the character in real life. But that was mirrored in the script, with the Doctor saying about Adric that he was silly and sulky, but he was just a kid. It feels like an observation you can make years later after someone had passed. It also says a lot about the Doctor when he says he never looks back, and Tegan saying, well, maybe that's what a memory TARDIS is for. It's about therapy. The memory TARDIS as a concept isn't something fixed in science, it's more of in the realm of fantasy. What it means is more conceptual. Like Lady Gaga's art pop, it could mean anything. But we'll discuss the memory TARDIS more as the series continues. Also, Tegan and Nyssa bumping uglies, lesbians confirmed. We love to see it. I feel like Earthshock was a great way to start the series and it really set the tone. Episode 2, The Mind Robber. Jamie and Zoe appear in the memory TARDIS, many years after they'd left the Doctor. When they both left the TARDIS, the Time Lords wiped their memories, But when they arrived in the memory TARDIS, all of their travels came back to them. As the two catch up, they think back on their time in the land of fiction. Pete McTighe wrote this episode. He had previously written Kablam and Praxeus, and also wrote a bunch of the collection box set mini-episode trailers, which I love. It very much feels like this series takes its inspiration from those mini-episodes, so it was smart of Russell to bring him in to write a few of these. One thing you can say about Pete is that he knows these characters so well. It felt very authentic. Fraser and Wendy fall back into their roles as if no time has passed as well. That's something I feel like I can consistently say throughout all of these episodes. Sometimes with projects like this, when an actor returns to a role so many years later, it can feel like the actor isn't the character. They look so different, and now they just look like the actor and not the character. Especially when someone is very, very famous. Like I felt like when I watched the new Star Wars movies, I'm not a big Star Wars fan, but like Mark Hamill, as he is now, is such a recognizable face. So when he's going back to play Luke, where he looks completely different to how he did, it could be a bit like, is that Luke or is that Mark Hamill? Because he's just so famous. And I feel like with Doctor Who, we know these actors so well from conventions, so sometimes it can feel like, oh, that's not Tegan, that's just Janet Fielding. But I don't feel like that was the case with this series, because I think all the cast did such a great job. And I think the scripts really helped them too. I also feel like these two characters have the least amount of chance of returning to the new series. Since both their memories were erased, they were hard to bring back. Now with their memories returned, maybe it would make sense somewhere. But I doubt they'll be asked to return. I'd love to be surprised though. But even if we don't, getting to see them back in this way is brilliant. And I think they've never looked better. Their costumes are brilliant. It's probably some of my favorite costumes in this whole series. Making Jamie's costume full of bright colors and Zoe referencing her glittery catsuit is the perfect way. Although 60s Doctor Who was shot in black and white, the 60s was full of color. I have to say, this is my favorite episode of the 6. I love them all, I love all the episodes, but I think this one is my favorite, and I'm gonna tell you why. I think returning Jamie and Zoe's memories is so impactful. Usually this type of thing can be seen as a bit of a cop-out. Their memories were erased and it's tragic and awful, and then it's just reversed. But in this instance, so much time had passed. The memory loss had impacted their lives. They moved on without the Doctor, even though in the back of their minds, he was always there. Even Zoe naming her son James, unaware she's naming it after Jamie. And when Jamie held the Doctor's recorder and saying, "I missed him every day of my life and I didn't realize it," broke me. The return of their times in the TARDIS is the Doctor's final gift to them. And I think it's just magical. It's not just the Doctor Jamie's forgotten, it was also Victoria. And he reminisces on her, and Zoe thinks that all of the Doctor's friends come to the memory TARDIS eventually. The memory TARDIS is a gift to those who didn't get closure, to those who forgot. Episode 3, Vengeance on Varos. The Doctor and Peri are reunited, older and wiser, to reflect on their time together. This episode really asks the question, did all of the trauma Peri went through help her to become a stronger person? But don't acknowledge any of the trauma the Doctor put her through though. It's the big dog, Phil Ford is back writing Doctor Who. Phil wrote The Waters of Mars and a whole bunch of Sarah Jane adventures, so I was very excited to see him return to the show. Unfortunately, this was my least favourite of the 6. I think Colin and Nicola are brilliant in it, and I would kill to see them return again together on screen. Their chemistry is unmatched. But my biggest issue is with Peri's story. I don't even think it's Phil Ford's fault. He really is shoehorned in the fact that Peri left the show by ending up as a warrior queen married to Brian Blessed. That makes it really difficult to write because it's just so silly. He tries to write it that Peri's experiences with these terrifying monsters helped shape her to become the warrior queen. The trauma associated with traveling with a Doctor helped guide her to do good things. I just personally don't buy it. I felt like this was the perfect time for discussing the past relationships between the Doctor and Companion, and no previous TARDIS team had this much trauma. The Doctor strangled Peri and treated her awfully and constantly berating her, yet None of that is touched upon in this episode. Look, I get it. It's the 60th anniversary. These are supposed to be fun. But I think there should have been some hesitation, like with the 7th Doctor and Ace, which we'll discuss later. There's baggage between these two. I'm not saying Perry should come out and strangle the Doctor, but there should be some sort of acknowledgement from the Doctor saying how much he regrets how he treated her. Or maybe Perry saying that she was hesitant about seeing him again, if that day ever came. But as time moved on, she had forgiven him maybe. I just found it surprising that it was completely avoided. Maybe it was just a bit too real. But I don't think that should be an excuse to not approach these difficult topics. I feel like this series is about therapy, and these two needed it the most. I did really like the transition of the feather falling down and Perry's disgust at remembering when she was turned into a bird. That sounds funnier than I'm saying it out loud, but it is actually kind of horrible to watch in the episode. And then we fall into them calling themselves the Warriors of the Universe, and off they go into time and space. I'm not sure if I love the idea of the Doctor being happy about being called a warrior, especially after the whole War Doctor thing. But I do love the idea of more travels with the Doctor and Perry, and I would love a new episode with them all grown up. But if I ignore what I think the episode should have been about and focus on what it was about, I thought it was fine. Hell, I still cried. I cried through all 6 of these episodes. Sorry, editing Josh here. I realized I didn't talk about the 6th Doctor's costume and how they completely redesigned it. Personally, I wish they put him in his original costume, but I understand why they did a different costume. I think they shouldn't be so afraid of that costume because I think it's fun and different. But maybe it was a thing where Colin didn't want to wear it anymore. Yeah, at points it makes you think, oh, is this the 6th Doctor or is it just Colin Baker? But Colin's performance is brilliant in it, so you do believe it. But yeah, I wish the costume was a bit closer to what he wore on screen. Episode 4, The Three Doctors. Jo Grant and Clyde Langer are reunited. Cliff, the love of Jo's life, has passed away, and Clyde's love story with Rani is about to begin. This one is interesting. It's completely different to the other ones because it's essentially a Sarah Jane Adventures sequel, and Phil Ford is the perfect person to write it. Daniel Anthony as Clyde Langer hasn't aged a day. I swear he's made a deal with the devil. If you could just send me the devil's email address, I am more than happy to make a blood sacrifice. Let's get it going. And it's always a joy to see Katie Manning on screen, especially playing Jo Grant. She is the loveliest person to ever exist, surely. And she is eating up the scenery. So many gasps and oohs and ahs. She's just so funny. I also think that Jo understands the memory TARDIS more than anyone else because of all the shrooms she was taking during the 70s. She's just on a different astral plane to the rest of us. I think what makes this episode so different and so strong is that it isn't really about the Doctor. Of course, our favourite Time Lord is mentioned, but it's really about the relationships they made outside of the Doctor. Jo said that she loved the Doctor, but not in the same way she loved Cliff. She may have travelled the universe with the Doctor, but that's nothing compared to her life with Cliff. Being a companion to the Doctor or Sarah Jane is brilliant and exciting, but it's not everything. It's not the end of their stories when they leave them. Jo loved the Doctor the same way Clyde loved Sarah Jane. She's trying to convince Clyde to get with Rani, saying that we're made of stories and you're missing the most important one. Mine wasn't the Doctor, it was Cliff. To make the story about the loss of Cliff and setting up the future for Clyde is a really unique choice, and I really appreciate it. Also, having a vocal cameo for Cliff was really respectful and really sweet. It's so easy for those post-death cameos to be tacky and disrespectful, but this one to me felt right. And I think this episode is really one of the best of the series. Episode 5, The Time Meddler. Stephen and Vicky both appear in the memory TARDIS and catch up. Vicky has moved to the countryside with Troilus, and Stephen is a king on a distant world. Now we're on to the First Doctor's friends reuniting, which is my favourite era of Doctor Who, as followers of this channel might know. Even though I love all of Doctor Who, don't get me wrong, for both of the characters, they both genuinely just miss the Doctor. It's just been so long since they last saw each other and departed on pretty good terms. Well, the Doctor wasn't happy both times, but the Doctor hates goodbyes. A lot of the emotional weight for Vicky is that she became the granddaughter that the Doctor lost when Susan left. A story beat that was there all the way from back in the 1960s. I feel like a lot of 60s Doctor Who had a lot of emotional beats like this, which is why I resonate with that era a little bit more compared to other eras of Classic Who. Especially in those first 2 seasons, it feels like there's a lot of it. I love that Stephen refers to Vicky as getting his sister back. It's so sweet. And when Stephen sees the 6th Doctor's coat and wonders if it's really their Doctor's TARDIS because he couldn't imagine the Doctor wearing it, and Vicky being jealous of Stephen for travelling after she left, and then becoming both childlike, wishing for the Doctor to appear again, is just magical. I think it's lovely that they decided that Hartnell's audio cameo should be his giggle. It's just so endearing. The first Doctor could be tough and difficult, but his heart was full of love, especially for his friends. And especially for Vicky. I think these audio cameos are much more respectful than a creepy CGI deepfake monstrosity. And the camera holding on Vicky's reaction is way more powerful than seeing a 3D model of Hartnell. Her emotion feels so real, and Maureen O'Brien gave it her all. I think it's so nice to see her have such a positive relationship with the program after all of these years. Episode 6, The Curse of Fenric. The 7th Doctor and Ace finally get a chance to say goodbye, only to set foot onto a brand new journey. It's clear why this story is the final episode of the series. It's the reunion the classic series needed the most, the ending the show never got. A goodbye for the Doctor and Ace. There is a ridiculous amount of baggage for these 2 characters, and Pete McTighe doesn't hide from confronting it. What I want more than anything is for these 2 characters to have a special full-length final episode together. The Doctor and Ace's final trip, where they part ways for a final time, or so they think. A conclusion to the classic era that ended too prematurely. But as the years go on, it seems that as a possibility, is getting less and less. So this is probably the closest we'll ever get. Pete does an incredible job at getting the tone between these 2 characters perfect. When the Doctor says to confront difficult truths, it immediately feels darker than the other episodes. This isn't going to be an easy conversation to have. Even Ace discussing how she got to Iceworld in the first place is dripping in bad memories, saying, "Except it wasn't my choice. I was taken there by Fenric." She's been manipulated for so long. Even into meeting the Doctor, she doesn't want to remember. She doesn't want to reflect and process this time, and who can blame her? Her time with the Doctor was terrifying, and more traumatic than any of the other companions. Their relationship at times was so toxic. The Doctor was always pushing her and manipulating her, a fact the Doctor finally admits to her, and tells her that he regrets it. He understands why she left him and doesn't blame her. She blamed all the death and destruction on the Doctor because she had to blame it on someone in order to process it. Even having Ace admit that she loved the Doctor as the dad she never had, and the Doctor saying that she loved her too, is something that I feel like never would have happened in the original run, but it feels so right. It felt like she could finally forgive him because she loved him, because he was family to her. McCoy and Aldred are in fine form, and I feel like their performance here is stronger than their Big Finish output. On screen, they're just electric together. They bounce off each other so well. I'm not sure about the part where they're quoting the speech from the end of Survival. That's a bit too fan servicey for me. I don't like when characters recollect dialogue word for word. It just feels unnatural. Why would they remember that? Sure, when it's a quick joke, that's fine. I understand you've redecorated, I don't like it. That's a recurring joke. I feel like that's something that people do remember. But a once-off conversation, I don't buy it. Sylvester doing the spoons on Sophie is lovely, it's funny and silly. The button mashing is hilarious, doesn't make a lick of sense. What are they pressing? They're just pressing whatever, but the sentiment is there. They've grown, they've changed, they're ready to move on. But one last trip for old times, hey. Series overview. So, that was a lot. 6 new episodes, all filled with similar themes of loss, unspoken truths, and trauma.
It's a movie about trauma.
It's a movie about trauma. The movie is about trauma.
Therapy, it's all about therapy. And like during my therapy sessions, I cried from beginning to end. I'm someone who easily cries, but I think even the most heartless classic Who fan might be somewhat moved by this series. Maybe not crying, but at least they're probably feeling something. And really, I hate to dog on the Chris Chibnall era because there is enough of that online, but I never resonated with any of the companions. I liked them, sure, but I didn't feel attached to them. So it was nice that after so many years of not feeling a single thing, that I found myself tearing up through every episode. Of course, these characters had been set up before, but this amount of depth is something that these new scripts have been given that the classic series didn't really explore. And Doctor Who, during this series, felt like an emotional roller coaster again. Something that I felt the Chris Chibnall era shied away from, which is fine. If that was the direction they were going in, that's totally fine. But for me, the thing I love about Doctor Who is that it's high emotion. Unfortunately, this series can't be viewed outside of the UK. It is an iPlayer exclusive. But if you have a VPN or know how to pirate, you can access it. It's been a while since it came out, and I don't think we'll be seeing an official international release. So what other options are there? I think if there was to be a second series, a shake-up might need to be considered. The stories are quite repetitive. A doctor and companion rock up to the memory TARDIS, they are confused as to what it is, then something emotional happens, then they sit down to watch an episode of Doctor Who, and then it ends on a very sweet note. I think it's a winning formula, but how many times can you do the same thing? And it's all the same set, so there's only so many ways you can shoot it interestingly. I think if it was to have a future, you'd have to break out a bit. But I think as a 6-episode miniseries, as a one-off, it's fine. Maybe they could have added an overarching storyline, maybe leading up to a villain or something, I don't know. It also makes you think that maybe this is the last time we see some of these characters on screen, which is incredibly sad. But even if it is the case, what a wonderful way to say goodbye to their characters. Not saying that the actors are dying anytime soon, but bringing back Steven into the main show doesn't seem like it's going to be something that happens anytime soon. Like, why would the Doctor ever return to the planet of the Savages? I just don't see that happening. The series also brings up the question of, what the hell is a memory TARDIS? This is one of those things that Doctor Who fans either love or hate. It's conceptual. It exists outside of scientific theory. It's a concept, it's an idea. It doesn't easily fit into a TARDIS wiki article. It isn't a machine invented by the Rani. It's the TARDIS, kind of. Where does it get the power to pick people up? Is it real? I feel like Doctor Who fans aren't usually a fan of when the series goes into more a conceptual area. It likes it when it's a bit more grounded. Like, let's say for example, like the idea of the story arc being the hybrid. And some Doctor Who fans are like, well, what is the hybrid? Because it's an idea. It's not like a physical thing. It's the Doctor and Clara. But that's kind of hard to get a grasp on, where, you know, there would be some people out there, it's like they like the idea of a Dalek and a Cyberman merging together and making a hybrid. That's more approachable to them. So when Doctor Who does stuff that's conceptual, sometimes they can be thrown by it. And it makes you ask the question, is the memory TARDIS real? How does it work? Does it even matter? I'm always happy to forgive fantastical elements if the emotional payoff works. Not saying I think that fantastical elements need to be forgiven, but if you're one of those people who wants to be based in scientific theory, that's what I mean. Like, for example, the curator doesn't make a lick of sense. You have to squint in order to make it work. But I think emotionally it works. Even though I think the curator is more fan servicey though. Anyway, that was a bit of a detour. But it just comes back to the question I'm always asking, where is the line with fan service? And I think it just comes down to personal taste, and we're all gonna draw the line somewhere. I think once it's distracting or feels forced, that's my line. It should complement the narrative and not be a detour from the narrative. And I think Tales of the TARDIS finds that line. I feel like they have enough stuff to talk about emotionally that it makes sense for these characters to return. Even if some of the returns are a bit more thin. Like Vicky and Steven, they just wanted to see the Doctor again. Like that's not as emotionally driven as something like Ace and the Doctor meeting again. Or, you know, Tegan and the Doctor talking about Adric. You know, these are things that they really needed to resolve. I think it's interesting watching this after the giggle and the Doctor's bi-regeneration. Russell said something along the lines of, after the Doctor bi-regenerated, all of the other Doctors did too and set off another timeline. And I think that's what's going on here in the memory TARDIS. These Doctors are older because they're the bi-generated versions. You could chalk it up to split timelines, a parallel universe, some time thing. I don't really mind. I think there's an answer if you're looking for one, but for me, I'm not too fussed. The future. If there was a season 2 of Tales of the TARDIS, this might be controversial, but I'd love if they did cut down edits of the stories. I think just joining all 4 episodes together and removing the titles is a really lengthy watch. I personally love a cut down edit. I think they're a fun new way of watching stories we've seen a million times. I think a cut down edit will be a great way for new series fans to adjust to classic Doctor Who. Because for Tales of the TARDIS, I watched all of Earthshock and all of The Mind Robber, and then for the rest, I just skipped to the end to get the new scenes, and that's it. I think having a cut down edit would give me a bigger reason to watch the whole episode, especially since these stories, except for The Mind Robber, had been released on Blu-ray at that point, meaning I had watched them somewhat recently. I'd love to see an episode where Leela returns. I think after the mini episode for the new collection box set, you could just see how brilliant she is. It would be great to see some new series companions and Doctors, but I'm not sure who I'd like to see, because I feel like everyone in the new series usually has a more emotionally satisfying conclusion compared to the classic series. I feel like Susan is the obvious person you want to come back, but without Hartnell, it's hard to really have that. It could be another Doctor. Imagine Capaldi and Susan. Or maybe even like Peter Davison and Susan, because you know in the 5 Doctors, they didn't really have a chance to have that moment of seeing each other again. I think that could be really, really nice. I think it would be interesting to have Paul McGann and maybe one of his Big Finish companions, but that makes it very complicated with what is and isn't canon if you're one of those people. I think there's no stopping them from picking up where they left off with this series as well. Maybe another adventure for the 7th Doctor and Ace. But really the format is limiting to what you can and can't do. Maybe one series is enough. I think it really is brilliant as it is. Maybe a spiritual successor maybe, something with a bigger budget. A proper adventure for an ex-Doctor and companion. Could you imagine that if they did like a series of like 30-minute mini episodes, like mini stories with like a returning Doctor and companion as they're all grown up? I would love that. That would be the absolute dream. You know, a new 7th Doctor and Ace story, a new 6th Doctor and Perry story. I would eat that up. Hell, I'm happy for the budget to be really small. I'm happy for it to be like set in just a couple of locations with a returning monster. But I doubt that will ever happen. But maybe, if we wish really hard, the Memory TARDIS will make it come true. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Josh Nares YouTube channel. And scene. But bringing Steven back... What the fuck is going on?